The bulldozers came before sunrise. I watched from my porch as they tore through my land, my family's ranch, without a single notice or apology. They said it was approved by the HOA, but what they didn't know is that I own the very company that keeps their faucets running. If you believe in poetic justice and karma that strikes when least expected, hit that subscribe button. This story proves that sometimes revenge doesn't need rage, just the truth. It started with the sound of steel against soil, a deep mechanical growl echoing across the dry Texas morning. The kind of sound that doesn't belong in peace, the kind that makes animals scatter, birds flee, and the heart throb with dread. I stood on the porch of the ranch my grandfather built in 1958, Hollow Creek, a place of memories carved into every acre. The sunrise spilled gold across the rolling hills, but the beauty was broken by the sight of machinery crawling across my land. Yellow bulldozers, men in hard hats, bright orange flags cutting through my fence line. At first I thought it was a county project, maybe maintenance, maybe something temporary. But as I walked closer, I saw the sign staked into the ground. HOA Infrastructure Expansion Project, Private Pipeline Installation, Private. HOA, on my land. I called out, but the foreman just waved like I was an inconvenience. "We've got permits," he shouted over the roar of diesel engines. "Permits? On my property?" I walked right up to the fence line, the barbed wire they had already clipped open. Dust swirled around me, thick and choking. I could smell the oil, the hot metal, the arrogance. They were trenching a line straight through the lower pasture, the one that led to the creek where the cattle drank. That creek wasn't just water. It was history. It was where my father taught me to fish, where my mother used to sit with her old camera, capturing sunsets. And now, they were burying pipes through it. I demanded to see paperwork. The foreman hesitated, shuffled through a folder, and handed me a single sheet, stamped with the HOA logo from the upscale neighborhood a few miles east. Approved for direct water connection, it read. But there was no signature from me, no authorization. That's when I realized they never asked. They assumed. See, the HOA had been expanding for months. The fancy subdivision on the hill, Whispering Oaks Estates, big houses, fake charm, and even bigger egos. They were running out of water pressure because of their manicured lawns and endless fountains. Their board, led by a woman named Karen Whitmore, decided to solve the issue by building a new supply line directly to the nearest water source, the one under my ranch. They must have thought the land was public, or maybe they didn't care. When I went to the county office that same day, I found the truth. The permit had been fast-tracked through an HOA committee that never verified property lines. On paper, it looked like open land, but in reality it was private. Mine. They had broken ground illegally. I tried reaching out to the HOA board. Left calls. Sent letters. No response. A week later, the line was already halfway done. The ground split open, metal pipes running like veins through my home. And all I could think was, how could they do this? It wasn't just about property. It was about disrespect. Every evening, I'd sit outside and watch the dust rise as they worked. The sound of drills echoed like thunder. My cows had stopped grazing near the site, spooked by the noise. The workers laughed, blasting music, treating it like their playground. By the end of the second week, I was livid. But I'm not the kind to yell or make scenes. I'm the kind that waits, watches, learns. That's when fate stepped in, quietly, almost poetically. One evening, while sorting through old company records in my office, I came across a file from my late father's estate, an ownership certificate for a business we had inherited decades ago. It was small back then, just a local water utility firm. I had forgotten all about it. Over the years, it had merged, grown, and been renamed the company. Blue Stream Water and Utilities, the same one supplying water to Whispering Oaks HOA. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The irony was suffocating. The same HOA that was tearing through my land, the same group that refused to answer my calls, was completely dependent on a water company my family owned. I didn't tell anyone right away. I just sat there in silence, staring at the paper. The logo looked so clean, so official, and so powerful, because right there, under primary shareholder, was my name. The next morning, I called my attorney. Then I called the Blue Stream Operations Director. Within hours, I had full control reinstated on all supply accounts under my signature. The HOA's system, listed under Commercial District 4, Residential Non-Essential. I asked a single question. What happens if service to District 4 is suspended for non-compliance? He replied, they go dry in 12 hours. I smiled. Not out of malice, but out of justice. That night, as the bulldozers slept under tarps and the workers drove off, I stood on my porch again. The air was still. The stars were sharp. And for the first time since this began, I didn't feel powerless, because the land they disrespected was mine. And the water they worshipped was too. I went back inside, turned off the lights, and began planning. Not for revenge, but for revelation, because sometimes karma doesn't knock. It flows through the pipes, and soon they'd hear it loud and clear. Morning came quiet and blue, with dew hanging on the fences like tiny shards of glass. But somewhere beyond the ridge, in the neat, sterile streets of Whispering Oaks, chaos was brewing. By 8 a.m., the HOA board members were already in a frenzy. The decorative fountains at the community entrance had stopped mid-flow, their marble bowls dry and cracked with air bubbles. Lawn sprinklers sat idle, and the water pressure in homes dropped to a weak trickle. At first, they assumed it was a maintenance issue. Few calls were made, a few technicians dispatched. But then came the real shock, the system-wide suspension alert from Blue Stream Water and Utilities. It read, service disruption in District 4 due to non-compliance with environmental and legal easement standards. Pending resolution, supply remains suspended. In the HOA's grand clubhouse, Karen Whitmore, their self-proclaimed queen, sat at the head of the long oak table. She was the type of woman whose perfume lingered longer than her patience. Expensive suit, pearls that glinted under LED lights, and a voice sharp enough to cut through glass. They can't do this, she hissed, slamming the paper onto the table. We pay premium rates. We fund their contracts. Someone will fix this before noon. But noon came and went. The taps remained silent. By evening, sprinklers lay dry across manicured lawns that had never missed a watering cycle. Residents complained, their perfect hedges beginning to wilt in the heat. Panic simmered behind the polished facades, and while they raged in their meeting rooms, I sat quietly on my porch, a cup of coffee in hand, watching the sky turn orange. The land was peaceful again. The machines had gone silent since the water line stopped operating. Even the creek seemed to flow softer, freer, like nature knew balance had returned, if only for a moment. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. Hello? A man's voice came through, informal, uneasy. Mr. Hayes, this is the HOA attorney representing Whispering Oaks. We've been informed of a service disruption affecting our development. Would you be aware of any ownership complications regarding Blue Stream Water? Complications. That word almost made me laugh. I'm aware, I said simply, and I'm aware your HOA built an illegal line across my property. Silence. Then, I see, his voice faltered. I'm sure we can come to an arrangement? I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the fading horizon. The arrangement is simple, I said. You fix what you broke, and you pay for what you took. By the next day, the HOA trucks were back on the property, but not to dig. This time, they were there to beg. The board sent a small delegation, including Karen herself. She arrived in a white SUV, spotless despite the dirt road, stepping out like she was above the dust itself. She didn't even greet me. Just walked up, sunglasses on, voice clipped. We need to resolve this immediately. There's a community at risk. Her tone wasn't apology. It was command. I didn't invite her inside. I just stood there, arms crossed. You trespassed, destroyed part of my land, and ran a line without permission. Why should I care about your fountains and pools? Her lips tightened. We had permits. No, I cut in. You had paper, not permission. She shifted, clearly unused to being challenged. You're going to regret this. People depend on that water. I nodded slowly. Funny? So do I. For a moment, the only sound was the wind brushing through the dry grass. Behind her, I saw the men who once operated those bulldozers, now standing awkwardly, their eyes lowered. Guilt has a sound. It's quiet. Karen turned and stormed off, her heels clicking against the gravel. You'll be hearing from our lawyers." She spat, and she was right. I did. Over the next week, legal letters started arriving. Formal complaints, threats of injunctions, accusations of malicious obstruction. Each one thicker than the last, printed on embossed stationery that screamed entitlement. But my attorney handled it with calm precision. Every document they sent was met with a reply containing one word: easement violation. Because no matter how powerful they thought they were, the law was on my side. Days passed and the HOA's desperation turned into chaos. The community WhatsApp groups filled with outrage. Residents couldn't shower properly. Pools turned green, lawns browned. Their perfect world was cracking under the weight of reality. A few even drove out to confront me. Men in golf shirts and mirrored sunglasses, women in yoga pants and fury. But I never raised my voice. I just reminded them of one fact. You shouldn't have touched what wasn't yours. Then came the article. A local journalist picked up the story. Wealthy HOA faces water cut after illegal pipeline scandal. Photos of the dry fountain spread online like wildfire. The internet loved it, a symbol of arrogance meeting consequence. Comments poured in. Karma hit right through the pipes. This is the kind of justice we need. They messed with the wrong rancher. For the first time, I didn't feel angry. I felt vindicated. And as the story gained traction, something else happened. Investors and executives from Blue Stream Water took notice. They called me, curious about my sudden involvement. When they realized the full picture, they stood firmly behind me. Legal, ethical, moral. Everything was on my side. By the end of the month, the HOA finally folded. Their lawyers offered a settlement. A big one. Enough to repair my land, restore the creek, and then some. But money wasn't what I wanted. I wanted a statement. And so, on a bright Monday morning, the same HOA that had ignored my calls now held a press conference. Their board president, not Karen, who had since resigned for personal reasons, publicly apologized to me and to the community. They called it an unfortunate oversight. I called it justice. After the cameras left, I walked to the trench they had once cut through my pasture. The soil was filled again, grass beginning to grow back. I knelt down and pressed my hand against the earth. It felt alive, forgiving, but deep inside I knew this wasn't the end. Because while they had learned their lesson, I had discovered something else. How power works. It doesn't roar. It doesn't shout. It flows. And I wasn't done yet, because in the shadows of that victory I began to wonder, what else had they done that people didn't know about? What other lands had they taken? What lines had they crossed? The truth was out there, and I was going to find it. The headlines died down after a few weeks, but the ripples never stopped. The HOA's apology had calmed the surface, but beneath it something darker stirred. It began with a phone call from a local farmer, about 6 miles south of my ranch. His voice cracked with worry. "They did the same thing to me," he said. "Cut through my irrigation field 2 years ago. Said it was county work. Never paid a dime. That call was the spark. I started digging, not into soil this time, but into records, permits, and county logs. What I found made my stomach turn. Whispering Oaks HOA had been using the same backdoor approvals for years. They built unauthorized lines across multiple properties, expanding their water system far beyond their legal rights. They had turned arrogance into an operation. Every project paper trail led back to one person, Karen Whitmore. Even after her resignation, her name appeared in documents, contracts, and shell companies. She hadn't stepped down to disappear. She'd stepped aside to cover her tracks. Late nights became my ritual. Coffee, files spread across the dining table, a dim desk lamp flickering like a heartbeat. My father's old notebook lay open beside me. He always wrote, "Land remembers." People forget, and I realized he was right. The ground doesn't lie. It records every scar, every trespass. By mid-November, I had a binder full of proof, unauthorized blueprints, forged signatures, and financial trails leading to consulting firms that funneled money back into HOA leadership accounts. The greed ran deep. One file stood out. A pipeline expansion marked Phase 5 South Ridge. The map outlined a route that didn't just touch my property. It crossed into protected wetland. That wasn't just a violation. It was a crime. I knew then that this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. But justice has a funny way of testing patience. I brought the documents to the county water authority. The officials were polite but cautious. "You're making serious allegations," one of them said, flipping through my evidence. "If this is true, we'll need verification." Verification meant time. Time meant delay. And delay meant the HOA would keep hiding their mess. So I decided to move faster, my way. Through my company, Blue Stream, I initiated a forensic audit on all District 4 and 5 operations. Technically, it was standard procedure, but in truth, I was hunting ghosts. Weeks passed. Files arrived, emails surfaced, and then a pattern emerged. Payments to subcontractors that didn't exist. Materials purchased for projects never built. And one peculiar expense, $280,000 for land restoration, on properties that, according to records, had never been disturbed. They were laundering money under fake construction work. The realization hit hard. What began as an act of arrogance had evolved into corruption. The next step was risky. I reached out to Channel 7 Investigative News, the same outlet that covered the initial pipeline scandal. The reporter Lydia Torres remembered me instantly. "You made quite a story last time," she said. "I've got a bigger one now," I replied. Within days, she and her crew were at my ranch. Cameras, notebooks, quiet curiosity. I laid everything out. The maps, the invoices, the proof. She listened without interrupting, her expression tightening with every document she turned. "This goes way beyond your land," she whispered. This could expose an entire system. She wasn't wrong. As she prepared her story, I took one more trip out to the trench where the illegal line had once run. The grass had grown back strong now, waving gently in the winter wind. The soil was healing, but just beyond that ridge, the HOA's luxury homes glistened in the sunlight, a world built on borrowed land and stolen water. I could almost feel the tension between the earth and the concrete. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters like whispers. I walked out onto the porch, the air sharp and cold. In the distance, I saw the faint glow of the HOA's streetlights. Small stars on the horizon. They looked fragile from here. Too fragile for the empire they pretended to be. The next morning, the story broke. Whispering Oaks HOA under investigation for environmental and financial fraud. It spread like wildfire. Local stations. Online news. Social media. People shared, commented, raged. The HOA board went silent. Calls went unanswered. Their website was taken down for maintenance. Karen's name resurfaced in every headline. Her photo, polished, smiling, confident, became a symbol of greed disguised as leadership. The investigation snowballed fast. County officials confirmed multiple permit violations. The environmental department launched a formal inquiry. Bank accounts were frozen. Projects halted. Whispering Oaks went from Texas's most prestigious community to Texas's most exposed HOA. And through it all, I stayed quiet. I didn't need to speak. The facts did it for me. But justice has consequences, even for the innocent. Some of the HOA residents, regular families not involved in the schemes, began suffering too. Their water supply stayed restricted. Their properties lost value. Their trust shattered. I drove through the neighborhood once, slow, silent, unnoticed. I saw kids playing in yards where sprinklers used to spray like clockwork. Lawns dry, fountains cracked, flags drooping. I felt no joy in that sight. Only understanding this wasn't revenge anymore. This was exposure, and exposure has no mercy. Later that week, Lydia's follow-up segment aired. It featured interviews with affected landowners, farmers, ranchers, homeowners, all wronged by the same system. Their voices blended into one chorus of anger and relief. The final shot of the segment was mine, standing on my porch, arms crossed, eyes steady. Lydia's narration echoed through living rooms across the state. For some, justice comes in courtrooms. For others, it comes when the earth finally gets its say. But even as the world applauded, I knew the storm wasn't over. Because Karen wasn't the type to vanish quietly. 2 nights later, I found a black SUV parked near my ranch gate, engine running. Lights off. When I stepped outside, it drove away fast. leaving behind a cloud of dust and a single envelope taped to the gate. No name. Just one typed line. "You don't know what you've started." The paper trembled in my hands, and I realized something chilling. Maybe I hadn't dug deep enough, maybe. The pipeline wasn't the only thing buried out. Here, the wind carried a strange chill that night. One that didn't belong to the season. The kind that whispers warnings before the storm. The same kind I felt when I saw that black SUV disappear into the darkness. I didn't sleep. Couldn't. Every creak in the wooden floorboards, every brush of a tree branch against the window felt amplified. The envelope still sat on the kitchen counter, the words printed in sharp black ink. "You don't know what you've started." But I did know. I'd started the truth, and someone out there wanted it buried again. By morning, I decided to bring in help. My friend Ethan Cole was a retired sheriff who'd lived 2 towns over. A man of few words and steady hands. When I called him and explained what was happening, his voice came low and certain. "Don't move anything. I'll be there by sundown." That day passed in uneasy silence. Even the cattle stayed close to the barn, as if sensing the tension in the air. Around noon, I drove out to check the gate. Fresh tire tracks led from the road into the gravel path. Heavy ones, wide treads. Whoever came by wasn't here for a visit. They'd come to watch. By dusk, Ethan's old truck rolled in, headlights cutting through the dusty haze. He stepped out, tall, broad, hat shadowing his eyes. The kind of man time couldn't weather. He picked up the envelope, read the message, and grunted. "That's not a threat," he said. "That's a warning." "From who?" I asked. "From someone who's scared," he replied. We spent the evening checking the property and the barns, the fences, the line where the pipeline had once cut through. In the dim light, we found something half buried near the old trench. A small metal tag. Stamped numbers? Contractor code? Ethan held it up under his flashlight. "See this?" he said. "This isn't local. These are federal project codes, federal." The word hit like thunder. What the hell would a private HOA be doing with federal tags? I asked. Ethan looked at me grimly. They weren't working alone. That night I locked the doors, something I'd rarely done before. The ranch had always felt like a fortress, open yet protected by history. But now it felt like a target. I sat by the window, the clock ticking slow and heavy. Outside, the fields glowed faintly under the moonlight, silver ripples running through the grass. Every shadow moved like it had a purpose. Around 2 a.m., I heard it, the low hum of an engine again. No headlights, just the growl of a slow-moving vehicle on the dirt road. Ethan was already up. He grabbed his flashlight, motioned for silence. We moved to the front porch, lights off, watching. The SUV rolled up to the gate, stopped for a moment, then reversed. As it turned, the moonlight hit its rear window. A company sticker glinted faintly. Whitmore Development Group, Karen. Even after everything, she was still circling, watching, waiting. Ethan shook his head. She's not just covering herself. She's protecting something bigger. The next morning, I drove to the county courthouse and pulled every corporate record I could on the Whitmore Development Group. It wasn't just an HOA consultancy. It was a full-blown development firm, one that had contracts tied to municipal infrastructure and federal environmental grants. In short, they had connections deep enough to bend rules and people. Then I saw it, a contract dated 3 years prior. Suburban Resource Expansion Project, signed off by both Karen Whitmore and Blue Stream Water's former CEO, a man named Robert Lang, the same man who retired quietly just before I inherited controlling shares. They had been partners once. It made sense now, how the HOA got away with their illegal construction, how their projects got fast-tracked, how nobody in the county had questioned the paperwork. The corruption ran through both sides of the pipeline, and if that was true, then I hadn't exposed the full truth yet. I drove back to the ranch in silence, the weight of realization pressing down on me. The pipeline wasn't just a theft of land. It was a cover, a front for something larger. That night, Ethan and I sat by the fire pit, the flames crackling softly. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" he asked. "That this wasn't about water," I said. "It was about money. Hidden contracts. Maybe even laundering," he nodded. "And you just blew open their pipeline." The following days were a blur of calls, threats, and whispers. My phone rang with blocked numbers, messages that started friendly but ended sharp. The sheriff's department logged 2 suspicious vehicles seen near my ranch entrance. It was pressure, quiet, invisible, constant. And then came the breaking point. One morning, as I checked the mailbox, there was a new envelope. Inside, a single photo, my ranch gate, taken from up close. In the background, I could see the porch, my chair, my boots, my coffee mug. The message this time wasn't typed. It was handwritten in black marker. "Stop digging." Ethan's face hardened when he saw it. "They're watching you. Up close. But fear has limits." And I'd crossed mine weeks ago. Instead of backing down, I went further. I compiled every document, every contract, every piece of proof into a file labeled Waterline. I uploaded it to a secure drive, shared it with Lydia from Channel 7, and sent a copy to the state attorney's office. If they wanted me silent, they'd have to silence the truth everywhere. That night, the SUV came again, slower this time, creeping along the edge of the property. Ethan and I stood on the porch, flashlights ready, but we didn't move. The car stopped at the same gate, idled for a moment, then drove off without a word. The silence that followed was heavy. Ethan exhaled, his voice low. "You know what this means, right?" I nodded. "Yeah? They know I'm not scared anymore." He gave a small smile. "Then it's almost over." I looked out at the horizon where the ranch faded into the night. Somewhere beyond that darkness lay the HOA, the developments, the greed that had nearly crushed everything my family built. But the land stood firm. The water still flowed, and my water, and now. The story that started with a stolen pipeline was about to flood every secret they'd tried to bury. Because when truth runs deep enough, it finds its own current, and theirs was about to break wide open. The next morning, the air felt heavier, like the sky itself was holding its breath, the kind of morning that warned of storms not yet seen. Clouds were gathering in the west, and with them, something else was building. Momentum. By sunrise, my phone started ringing again. This time, not from blocked numbers, but from reporters. The leak had gone public. Lydia's report from Channel 7 had gone national overnight. The headline was simple, but devastating. Watergate of the suburbs, HOA development scandal exposed. It hit every major outlet within hours. The story detailed everything. The illegal pipelines, the falsified permits, the secret contracts between Whitmore Development Group and Blue Stream Water's former leadership. They had used federal infrastructure grants to build private systems, and then passed the cost to homeowners. Millions in profit, all hidden beneath manicured lawns and luxury signage. The public's reaction was instant and furious. The HOA offices were swarmed by angry residents demanding refunds. County officials were grilled on live TV. And Karen Whitmore's name, once spoken with admiration in real estate circles, became a symbol of corruption. As I sat at my kitchen table, coffee steaming beside stacks of old files, my phone buzzed with message after message. Journalists, lawyers, other landowners, all thanking me, calling me the man who made the water flow again. But I didn't feel heroic. I felt tired. Years of quiet respect for my family's land had turned into a war for its dignity. And though justice was finally rising, it came at a cost. Ethan walked in from the porch, hat in hand. "You've started a flood, Noah," he said, half smiling. "They can't stop it now." He wasn't wrong. By noon, federal agents arrived at the HOA's headquarters. Boxes of documents were hauled out, computers seized, cameras rolled as suited men walked through the glass doors that once sparkled with pride. I watched it all unfold on television, a strange mix of satisfaction and sorrow twisting in my chest. It was finally happening. The land was being heard. But just as justice felt close enough to touch, a call came that chilled me again. It was Lydia. Her voice trembled slightly. "Noah, we found something. You need to see this yourself." I met her that evening in the Channel 7 studio, where her desk was covered in fresh documents her team had uncovered. The top was a file labeled Ridgewater Project, Phase 6. "What's this?" I asked. She hesitated before answering. "A new development site. Approved last year. But here's the catch. It's listed under your name." I frowned. "That's impossible." "It gets worse," she said quietly. "The land attached to this project isn't yours. It belongs to the county reserve. Protected wetlands. But the approval signatures? Forged, using your credentials as Bluestream's primary shareholder. I felt the blood drain from my face. Someone was framing me. Ethan leaned over the papers, scanning every line. "This isn't just cleanup anymore," he muttered. "They're trying to bury you with the mess," Lydia nodded. "Whoever's behind this knew exactly how to make it look real. And if it sticks, they'll call it fraud." The realization struck like lightning. Karen wasn't just hiding. She was retaliating. I took a deep breath, forcing my thoughts into order. "How long do we have before they move?" "Maybe a few days," Lydia said. "But once they file it, it becomes a federal case." I looked out through the studio glass at the city lights beyond. So bright, so clean, so far removed from the dirt they came from. "They underestimated me once," I said finally. "They won't get that chance again." That night, back at the ranch, Ethan and I dug into every digital record. Every email, every login, every contract I'd signed in the past decade. It took hours, but eventually we found it. The breach. A single unauthorized access to Bluestream's internal database, dated the same week Karen resigned from the HOA. Logged in from a device in her company's office, she had cloned my identity in the system, used it to approve Ridgewater, the fake project, then leaked it herself, betting that the fallout would discredit me. It was cunning, desperate, and dangerous. The next day I met with the state attorney's office. They listened carefully as I presented my findings, eyes widening as each document surfaced. When I finished, the room was silent. Finally, one of them spoke. "Mr. Hayes, what you've done here. This could bring down an entire network, but it also puts you in the middle of it. You'll need protection. Protection." The word felt strange, like a line had officially been crossed. By that evening, my ranch was under quiet watch. A county cruiser parked down by the gate. Ethan stayed armed near the barn. The silence of the fields was broken only by the occasional hum of a patrol engine passing by. I didn't sleep that night either. I walked the property instead, slow, steady, letting the cold air clear my mind. The moon hung low, silvering the fence lines and the grass that now grew over the buried pipeline. So much had changed. The land that once felt eternal now pulsed with the tension of truth. Around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed again. A single message. Unknown number. "You think you won? You just opened the floodgates." I stared at the screen, the glow cutting through the dark. My reflection looked tired, older, but not afraid. I texted back one line, "Good, let it drown you." The next morning, news broke again, this time not from Lydia. Federal prosecutors had officially charged Karen Whitmore, Robert Lang, and 3 other board members with fraud, embezzlement, and environmental violations. Their empire had fallen, but Lydia's warning echoed in my mind. You just opened the floodgates, because if the HOA corruption ran this deep, how far up did it really go? That evening, as rain finally began to fall, the water pooled across the pasture, flowing clean and free. I watched it rush through the ditches they once carved illegally. Now reclaimed by nature, justice wasn't quiet anymore. It roared, but the storm had only begun, because for every secret that surfaced, there was always one more buried beneath it. And somewhere out beyond the horizon, someone else was watching. Rain had washed through the valley for 2 days straight, flooding the old culverts and washing away years of buried lies. The news outlets called it poetic, nature taking back what corruption stole. To me, it just felt like closure, or so I thought. By the 3rd morning, the clouds broke and the light returned, harsh, white, and revealing. I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, watching the land steam under the sun. Lydia's voice echoed faintly from the radio inside, her final report before taking a short leave. Federal officials have confirmed additional evidence linking the Ridgewater project to a wider network of fraudulent developments across 3 counties. Investigations continue, but sources close to the case suggest that a master file, a hidden set of plans, may reveal the full scope of the operation. That phrase, master file, made my stomach turn. I knew what she was talking about. Weeks before all this started, Ethan had mentioned an encrypted archive Karen's husband once bragged about, the insurance policy. If it existed, it could either expose the last of the corruption or destroy what was left of me. I turned to Ethan, who was oiling his rifle by the barn. "You remember what Whitmore said at that fundraiser years ago? About keeping blueprints of every deal in one place?" He nodded slowly. "The Atlas Room, beneath the HOA offices." That name sent a chill through me. The Atlas Room, the one place I'd never been allowed into when I still held shares in Bluestream. It was supposed to be a secure record vault for development maps. But now, I realized it might be the key to ending everything for good. So that night, we went back. The HOA building stood silent under flickering streetlights. Yellow crime scene tape still stretched across the doors, but the guards were gone. The investigation had moved elsewhere. Ethan picked the lock like he'd done it 100 times. We slipped inside. The air smelled of dust, metal, and wet carpet. Files littered the floors, some marked with red evidence tags. But in the far corner, behind a shattered glass wall, was a staircase, steel, narrow, and descending into shadow. "The Atlas Room," Ethan muttered. We followed the steps down until we reached a heavy door. Keypad and biometric scanner long dead from the power cuts. I placed my hand on the handle and pushed. It creaked open with the sound of something waking up after too long. Inside was a world of paper and silence. Stacks of rolled blueprints stood like tombstones, each labeled in neat handwriting. Phase 1, Phase 2, Ridgewater, Silver Creek. And in the center, under a single flickering bulb, stood a steel cabinet with a nameplate that read, "Atlas Master Set." We approached carefully. Ethan found a crowbar nearby and pried the drawer open. Inside, dozens of sealed folders sat arranged by date. The most recent one, marked 2024 Q3, had my name printed on the corner. I tore it open. Inside wasn't just paperwork. There were drives, signed letters, and blueprints for new projects, some in other states, all stamped with falsified signatures and fake company seals. But what froze my breath was the last page. A full-page diagram labeled Pipeline Expansion, Private Distribution Network, Federal Connection. The routes crossed state lines. That made it a federal crime of the highest order. Ethan whistled under his breath. "This isn't just HOA money laundering, Noah. This is national infrastructure fraud." I looked closer. One signature stood out, clean, confident, and unmistakable. Senator Charles Whitmore, Karen's husband. He wasn't just involved. He was leading it. The realization hit like thunder. The HOA was just a front, a suburban mask for a political empire that funneled billions through community water improvement grants, and we'd just found the proof. Suddenly, footsteps echoed above us. Heavy, slow, deliberate. Ethan's eyes met mine. "We've got company." We killed the light and ducked behind a row of file shelves. A beam of a flashlight swept across the room, cutting through the dark. A voice followed, sharp. "Familiar? Mr. Hayes, you should have stayed quiet." Karen Whitmore. She stepped into view, soaked coat dripping, eyes wild with something between rage and desperation. "You don't understand what you've done," she hissed. "You think this is about land and pipelines? You've just torn down something much bigger." I stepped out from behind the shelf, holding the blueprint folder. "You mean your husband's empire?" Her eyes flicked toward the file. "You don't want that, Noah. That's not your fight. It became mine when you buried my family's land under your lies." Her face hardened. "You could have walked away. We offered you money, power, even silence. But now," she raised her hand, revealing a small black pistol. "Now you're just a problem to fix." Before I could move, Ethan shouted, "Down!" And the lights above shattered as a shot rang out. Chaos exploded in the room. Papers flew. The flashlight fell, spinning wild beams across the walls. Ethan lunged at Karen, wrestling the gun away. But she kicked free and bolted up the stairs. We followed, heart pounding, rain hammering the building from outside. At the top, the glass doors burst open. She ran into the storm, heading toward a black SUV waiting by the curb. "Karen!" I shouted. "It's over!" She turned just once, rain streaking her face. "You don't know how deep it goes." Then she got in the car, and before we could reach her, it sped off into the night. The next day, federal agents found the SUV abandoned near the state line. No sign of Karen, no trace of the files we didn't grab, but what we did have, the master blueprints, were enough. Within weeks, Senator Whitmore was indicted. The corruption network collapsed, and the town finally exhaled. Months passed. The HOA dissolved. The land healed. Grass grew where concrete once stood. Lydia published her final piece titled, "The Last Blueprint: How One Man's Land Exposed America's Hidden Corruption." Ethan rebuilt the barn. I rebuilt my piece, but sometimes when the wind blew from the west, I could almost hear her words again. You don't know how deep it goes, and I knew. Deep down she was right, because truth doesn't end with justice. It just waits, buried, and for the next person brave enough to dig. The story of the HOA wasn't about revenge. It was about roots, and roots always find their way back to the surface.